I love to buy future rookie picks, especially those future firsts that never lose value. They don't take up a roster spot. And if you trade for the right pick just a year or two ahead, that pick could be worth way more than you paid for and be the accelerant on a rebuild or a massive boost to an already dominant contender. And my favorite way to do this is by targeting a middle of the pack team in your league who is probably a little overconfident in their ability to compete this year. And I'd trade them a player that might have upside, but really kind of doesn't have upside and isn't really going to be a huge help to their roster, but they might think that he is. So you really only need to do this like once a year. Just identify that one team that you think is a little overconfident in their abilities this year, trade them that player, and then profit later on in the future. So with that in mind, I have a handful of players that I would be looking to trade away right now for future first round picks. Starting first with Jordan Addison, who by all means had a really strong rookie season, but 50% of his production came in the 7 games that Justin Jefferson missed, and he averaged nearly 15 PPR points per game during that stretch. Compare that to the 10 games that he played with Justin Jefferson, and he averaged only 12 PPR points per game, and his per game averages for targets, receptions, and yards all dropped by about 30%. He still had solid games for fantasy with Jefferson on the field, but those games were largely on the back of big play touchdowns on lower target volume. In fact, I know this isn't really fair to do because he did score those touchdowns, but if you remove the 4 35+ yard touchdowns that he had while playing with Justin Jefferson, Addison's fantasy season goes from wide receiver 23 down to wide receiver 36. But even with all those touchdowns and with all that production without Justin Jefferson, Addison still only finished as a top 24 wide receiver 6 times last year, which is only 35% of his games played. That 35% was good for 38th among all receivers last year who played a minimum at least 10 games. That was the same percentage as Tyler Lockett, as Adam Thielen, Brandon Cooks, Hollywood Brown, Gabe Davis, and Rashid Shaheed. Translation: Jordan Addison was a home run flex play last year that more often resulted in a finish outside the top 40 than inside the top 25. And let's not forget that 4 of his 6 top 24 finishes came with Kirk Cousins under center. And while JJ McCarthy and Sam Darnold are presumably better than Nick Mullins and Josh Dobbs, I feel very confident in saying that they are not better or even close to as good as Kirk Cousins. So at least for 2024 and into 2025, we have what I'm going to call a below average quarterback situation, playing still behind the best wide receiver in the NFL right now, who's still going to get like 170 plus targets a season easily because it's Justin freaking Jefferson. You have an upgraded running back room with Aaron Jones as the RB1 and Ty Chandler still as the backup, so overall pass attempts might drop in favor of rush attempts to get the ball out of McCarthy or Darnold's hands. And even though TJ Hawkinson tore his ACL at the end of last year and is going to miss time in 2024, he'll still be back at some point this year, and he will also be there in 2025 and on as well. So all in all, I just don't see how Addison returns on his wide receiver 27 ADP or wide receiver 25 value on Keep Trade Cut as a more than replacement level player. And if that's the case, flipping him for a mid 2025 first that has a shot of being earlier is well worth the gamble to me if that pick turns into Tet McMillan or Emeka Egbuka or whoever the RB1 in the class ends up being next year. And if it somehow turns into Luther Burden, then you just hit the jackpot. Now, the next 2 receivers on this list are both aging veterans who had great 2023s, but Father Time is undefeated and I'm worried about their futures. So the first is Davante Adams, who enters his age 31 season this year, still is the alpha wide receiver 1 in Vegas, but once again finds himself with a new quarterback, a new coaching staff, a new offensive system, and this year has legitimate target competition in Brock Bowers that he didn't have last year. Which, speaking of last year, 2023 was actually the worst fantasy season of Adams' career since 2016, averaging just 15.5 PPR points per game, which is still good for a top 15 finish, but it was his first non-double-digit touchdown season since 2019, his lowest yards per game since 2017, and his fewest yards per target since 2015. And all of that while actually seeing the second most targets of his entire career. So when I see that Davante Adams still has a wide receiver 26 ADP, I see that as a massive opportunity to get out right now. Sell him for a random 2025 first or even a 2026 first plus if you can, especially if that middle of the pack team wants to go all in for 2024 and doesn't value their 2026 picks right now. Take advantage of that because their team might be in shambles next year if they sell out for 2024, and that 2026 pick, though 2 years away, could be a top 3 pick or even maybe the 1.01 in that class. And the same goes for the other aging veteran receiver on this list, the new Houston Texan wide receiver Stefon Diggs, who finished one spot higher than Davante Adams last year as the wide receiver 14 in PPR points per game. The story with Diggs is fairly similar to Adams, except now we're accounting for his role on a completely new team with way more competition for targets. Now, this might sound like a hot take, but I really don't think it should be. Stefon Diggs right now is the 3rd best receiver on this team. I'm very confident that he is not better than Nico Collins as an X receiver, and I am that confident in Tank Dell at this stage in their careers to say that Tank Dell is better right now. Plus, we know that CJ Stroud loves Tank Dell, so any opportunity that he has to throw his ball his way, you know he's going to try to. I mean, he picked Tank Dell to be on his all-NFL offense versus Micah Parsons' all-NFL defense, for crying out loud.
Davante Adams at X, Tank Dell at my slot, my F. LT at left tackle. My guy from the Ravens, 70 at left guard. I got Humphrey at 53. Quinn Nelson at right guard. Lane Johnson at right tackle. Got Jahmyr Gibbs at my running back. I got myself as quarterback. Travis Kelce as my tight end. And I have Jamar Chase as my Z. Once this corner collapse on this dagger, I have Tank Dell run a pylon for a touchdown while you're trying to guard 3 yards.
I still remember back when Diggs first got traded, I had a comment on a video comparing the situation to the Buccaneers getting Antonio Brown on a team that already had Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. And I have to say, that comment has stuck with me so hard because it feels so accurate. Antonio Brown antics aside, all 3 receivers were very viable for the Bucs that year with Tom Brady at quarterback. So Diggs can still be very fantasy viable this year in Houston, but again, at his age, learning a brand new offense with a brand new quarterback, plus the way that he ended last season looking like absolute burnt toast and the team having no ties to him after this year whatsoever, it's hard to see much of a future for Diggs as a good dynasty asset. So if you can sell him now while he's still worth a random 2025 or random 2026 first round pick, that is the smart dynasty move for the long run, let alone the actual potential ROI if that pick you get is actually better than you thought. All right, looking at the running back position now, there is literally no better sell candidate at his ADP in probably all of Dynasty Fantasy Football than Zamir White. If you have Zamir White on your roster, I would be sending out offers to every single team in your league for their first round pick, especially those middle of the pack teams that just need that RB2 to push them over the hump. Please give them Zamir White for their first round pick. We do this every single year and we never learn from it. There's always that one running back who gets massively pushed up draft boards because of super small sample sizes and potentially massive volume, but everyone overlooks the simple fact that that player is usually not that good. The easy example, of course, is Alexander Mattison because it's fresh in our minds from last year. He did really well in games that Dalvin Cook missed, but he's actually just not that good of a running back, and even though he got volume last year, he was not good for fantasy football. In 2022, it was Chase Edmonds who signed with the Dolphins as their potential RB1 in the offseason after posting really strong weeks with the Cardinals filling in for James Conner. Except Edmonds didn't rush for over 35 yards once and was traded to the Denver Broncos by week 9. In 2021, it was Mike Davis who signed with the Falcons after a huge season in Carolina, filling in for an injured Christian McCaffrey, and was the presumed RB1 in a brand new Arthur Smith offense. Unfortunately, Davis never topped 55 yards once in a game, and that season ended up being the Cordarrelle Patterson 9th-year breakout that everybody was hoping for. In 2020, some of you may remember as the Clyde Edwards-Helaire year after being drafted in the first round of the Chiefs to fill the RB1 role. Little did we know that CEH actually wasn't worth that draft capital even remotely close and barely scraped together a top 24 season. I'll also give a shout out here to Kenyon Drake for tricking everyone into his top 12 running back ADP in redraft before finishing outside the top 25 at the position. In 2019, it was Damian Williams. In 2018, it was Alex Collins. 2017, Isaiah Crowell. 2016, Jeremy Langford. 2015, Andre Ellington. The list goes on and on and on. And who is the glaringly obvious candidate for 2024? Zamir White. As I mentioned with Davante Adams, this is a brand new coaching staff and brand new offensive system. This is not the same offensive coordinator that was calling plays last year when White did well for 4 games without Josh Jacobs. He is not a receiving threat at all. That is Amir Abdullah's role in the offense, and no one has seemed to mention the fact that 3 of the 4 defenses he faced last year were bottom 10 in fantasy points allowed to running backs. 2 of them were bottom 5. He did tear up the Kansas City Chiefs. I will give him credit for that, but that was a cold divisional outdoor December game where the Raiders scored twice on defense and were up by 2 or more scores for over half the game, so White was really just running down the clock. But still, over those 4 games, he averaged just 15 fantasy points per game on 23 touches per game. That is horribly inefficient from a point per touch standpoint, and let's not act like White has super longevity in the league either. He's not going to get a massive second contract, not even be surprised if he was still the starter for the Vegas Raiders this time next year. I just don't get why he's being valued as RB21 on Keep Trade Cut ahead of actually good running backs like David Montgomery, Alvin Kamara, Tony Pollard, Najee Harris, Javonte Williams, and even Brian Robinson. And he's in the same tier as DeAndre Swift and Joe Mixon on KTC. Like, what are we doing?
Doesn't anyone notice this? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills.
I actually went into the DLF Trade Finder and counted 8 individual times out of 45 trades done since the beginning of May that Zamir White was traded for a first-round pick. And that's not including the other deals where he was traded for players that I would trade first for, like Zamir White for Tank Dell, Zamir White for Baker Mayfield in a Superflex League, White and a 2027 first for Kyler Murray, White and Jalen Waddle for Justin Jefferson. It's like half of these last 45 trades with Zamir White in them are all grossly overvaluing White. So I say again, please trade away Zamir White for a future first round pick before it's too late.